Victoria Bennett thought calling the cops on me was her power move. What she didn't know was that I had security footage of her trespassing on my property for 3 years. And I was about to use every single frame. My name is Ryan Mitchell. And 48 hours ago, I was just a heartbroken dad demolishing the pool my ex-wife used to keep my daughter away from me. But when Victoria, our HOA president, decided to weaponize the law against me, she accidentally started a war with the wrong person. Because what Victoria didn't research before calling 911 was my day job. I'm a municipal code enforcement officer, and I know exactly where all the bodies are buried in this neighborhood. Now, I know what you're thinking. We've all had that neighbor who thinks they run the block, right? The one who measures your grass and times your trash cans. As this story unfolds, you're probably going to recognize some familiar patterns from your own neighborhood drama. Trust me. What happened next will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about HOA politics. It all started 6 months ago when my divorce from Sarah was finalized. The custody arrangement was brutal. Every other weekend with my 7-year-old daughter, Emma. And that was it. Sarah had used our backyard pool as ammunition during the proceedings, claiming it was unsafe and that I couldn't properly supervise Emma around water. The irony wasn't lost on me, considering I'd been a competitive swimmer in college and had taught Emma to swim before she could properly walk. But Sarah had her new boyfriend now, a lawyer who knew exactly which buttons to push with the family court judge. They painted me as the irresponsible dad who worked too much and didn't pay attention to safety. Never mind that I'd installed a pool fence, an alarm system, and safety covers. Never mind that Emma and I had spent countless summer afternoons playing Marco Polo and having tea parties on floating unicorns. The pool became a symbol of everything I'd lost. So 3 weeks ago, I made the decision to demolish it. I pulled the permits properly, hired a disposal company, and started the teardown process myself. Physical labor felt good. Every swing of the sledgehammer was therapy. Each chunk of concrete I hauled away was another piece of grief I could finally release. That's when Victoria Bennett entered my life like a tornado in a business suit. Victoria had moved into the house next door 2 years ago. Shortly after her husband's death, left her with a substantial life insurance payout. She immediately positioned herself as the neighborhood's moral authority, running for HOA president on a platform of elevating property standards. What that really meant was measuring everyone's grass with a ruler and sending violation notices for trash cans left out 12 hours too long. But Victoria had this weird obsession with everyone's property boundaries that went beyond typical HOA nosiness. She'd walk the neighborhood with a measuring tape and camera, taking photos of fence lines and making notes in a leather portfolio. I'd noticed her behavior but dismissed it as just another quirky neighbor trait. Big mistake. On Tuesday morning, I was breaking up the concrete pool deck when I noticed Victoria watching me from her kitchen window. She had that same measuring tape in her hand, and she kept glancing between my work area and something on her phone. Then she disappeared for about 10 minutes before reappearing in her backyard, positioning herself right at our shared fence line. "Morning, Victoria," I called out, wiping sweat from my forehead. Beautiful day for some demolition. She didn't respond with her usual tight-lipped smile. Instead, she started taking photos of my fence line, which seemed odd for someone complaining about pool destruction. She was documenting something specific, but I couldn't figure out what. Just making sure everything's up to code. "Ryan," she finally said, her voice carrying that condescending tone she'd perfected during HOA meetings. "Property maintenance affects all of us." 3 hours later, I heard the crunch of gravel in my driveway and looked up to see a patrol car pulling up to my house. My stomach dropped. Officer Janet Torres stepped out, to a professional expression on her face as she surveyed the demolished pool area. Behind her, Victoria emerged from her house like she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. She wore a navy blazer despite the 80-degree heat and carried a manila folder that looked suspiciously well prepared. "Mr. Mitchell?" Officer Torres approached with her notepad ready. "I'm responding to a complaint about property destruction." "Are you the homeowner?" "I am." I stripped off my work gloves and walked toward them, my mind racing. "What seems to be the problem?" Victoria stepped forward before the officer could respond. Her thin lips pressed into what she probably thought was a righteous expression. "Officer, this demolition project is creating safety hazards and property damage. Concrete debris is flying into neighboring yards, and I have concerns about proper permitting." I felt that familiar heat rising in my chest, the same anger that had been simmering since the divorce proceedings. But my professional training kicked in. Officer Torres, I have all the required permits for this pool removal. I pulled out my phone and showed her the digital permits. Everything's been approved by the city. Victoria's confident expression flickered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. Well, officer, even with permits, he's creating safety hazards. These concrete chunks are flying into neighboring properties. My property line is less than 6 feet from where he's working. That's when I decided to drop my first bomb. Ma'am, I actually work for the city's code enforcement department. I wrote half these regulations myself. The silence that followed was beautiful. Officer Torres looked between us with growing understanding, while Victoria's face went through several interesting color changes. But instead of backing down like any reasonable person would, Victoria doubled down. That's interesting. Mr. Mitchell, she said, and something in her tone made my radar go off. Then you know how seriously the city takes compliance issues. She had this mysterious smile as she walked away, and that's when I knew I was dealing with something bigger than just a nosy neighbor. After Officer Torres left, having confirmed that all my permits were in order, I couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria's confidence seemed misplaced. Most people would be embarrassed after calling the police on a city employee who was following all regulations, but Victoria looked like someone who just played an opening move in chess. That evening, I did what any good code enforcement officer would do. I pulled my own property records. What I found made my blood run cold. My fence, the one that had been in place when I bought the house 5 years ago, had somehow moved 3 feet into what should have been Victoria's yard. Not only that, but the survey markers seemed to have shifted position over the past 2 years. I spent the next 4 hours going through old property photos, satellite images, and city records. The pattern became clear. Victoria had been gradually moving our shared fence, inch by inch, month by month. She'd documented each adjustment with photos, creating a paper trail that suggested I'd been encroaching on her property all along. She was building a case for adverse possession. In simpler terms, she was trying to legally steal a strip of my land by claiming I'd abandoned it to her use. And the way she'd set it up, it looked like I was the one violating property boundaries. My phone rang at 9:30 p.m. It was Derek Chen, a property law attorney I'd worked with on several city cases. Ryan, you're not going to believe what just landed on my desk, Derek said without preamble. Victoria Bennett just retained my law firm for a property dispute consultation. She specifically asked about adverse possession claims against municipal employees. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Victoria hadn't just moved to our neighborhood randomly. She'd specifically targeted me because of my job. She knew that a code enforcement officer involved in a property dispute would face intense scrutiny. If she could make me look like a hypocrite who violated the very regulations I enforced, she could destroy my credibility and probably my career. Derek, I need you to decline that consultation, I said, and I need to tell you why. The next morning, I called in a favor with Marcus Rodriguez, the city's chief building inspector. Marcus and I had worked together for 8 years, and he'd been wanting to do a systematic review of our neighborhood anyway, after receiving several anonymous complaints about unpermitted work. You know, Ryan, Marcus said as we walked my property line, I've been getting some interesting reports about this street. Apparently, someone's been very concerned about code compliance in your area. We spent 2 hours documenting everything: the fence encroachment, the suspicious survey markers, and most importantly, the dates when everything had been moved. But that's when Marcus made a discovery that changed everything. Ryan, take a look at this. He was standing at the corner of Victoria's property, staring at her garage. See that addition? The one with the office windows? I looked closer. Victoria's garage had been converted into what looked like a professional office space, complete with a separate entrance and a small parking area. Is that... I started. An unpermitted commercial conversion in a residential zone? Marcus nodded grimly. Yeah, it is. And see that electrical meter? That's been modified to handle commercial load without city approval. But the real bombshell came when Marcus checked the septic system. Victoria's property was on city sewer, but she'd somehow connected an additional system that bypassed the municipal treatment plant. Ryan, Marcus said quietly. Your neighbor isn't just stealing your land. She's running an illegal law practice out of her garage. As I watched Victoria through her office window, typing away at her computer with complete confidence, I realized she'd made one critical error. She'd started a game with someone who knew all the rules, had access to all the records, and was really motivated to win. But I wasn't done investigating yet, because something Marcus said triggered a memory. Anonymous complaints about our neighborhood. I had access to those records, and I was about to find out just how deep Victoria Bennett's schemes really went. That evening, I accessed the anonymous complaint database from my home office. What I found made everything crystal clear. Over the past 18 months, someone had filed systematic complaints about 6 different properties on our street. Not random violations, but specific targeting of vulnerable homeowners. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow, 3 houses down, had been reported for excessive vegetation right after her husband's funeral. The timing was surgical. Filed exactly 3 days after the obituary ran in the local paper. The Johnsons, a young couple struggling with medical bills, got cited for exterior maintenance issues the week after their son's surgery. Each complaint was filed by someone who clearly understood city codes and knew exactly which violations would trigger the most expensive remediation requirements. But here's what made me realize just how calculated Victoria was. She'd researched each family's financial situation before striking property tax records, bankruptcy filings, divorce proceedings. She had files on everyone, targeting them at their most vulnerable moments when they couldn't afford legal representation or costly repairs. The complaint signatures all used different names, but they shared one thing. Every single report had been filed from the same IP address, Victoria's home internet connection. Cross-referencing the complaint dates with my security footage revealed something even more sinister. Victoria had been conducting surveillance walks through the neighborhood, photographing minor violations and building dossiers on every family. She'd turn those photos into official complaints weeks or months later, timing them for maximum financial impact. She hadn't just targeted me. She'd been systematically harassing the entire neighborhood, using her legal knowledge to weaponize city regulations against people who couldn't afford to fight back. I was just her biggest prize because destroying a code enforcement officer would give her ultimate credibility. The most chilling discovery came when I cross-referenced Victoria's complaint timing with local real estate transactions. Every single family she'd harassed had received unsolicited purchase offers within 60 days of their citations. The offers came from different shell companies, but they all traced back to Victoria's investment portfolio. She wasn't just filing complaints for sport. She was creating financial pressure to force below-market sales, then flipping the properties for massive profits. Mrs. Patterson's case was particularly heinous. Victoria had researched her late husband's military pension records and knew exactly when Mrs. Patterson's fixed income would be stretched thinnest. The excessive vegetation complaint came with a cleanup requirement that would have cost $12,000. Money Mrs. Patterson simply didn't have. 3 weeks later, Victoria's company offered to buy her house for 60% of market value, positioning themselves as her savior. But Victoria Bennett had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd picked a fight with someone who had both the knowledge and the resources to fight back. The next morning, I called Marcus with an update that would change everything. Marcus, I need you to schedule a comprehensive neighborhood safety inspection. We have reasonable cause to believe there's been systematic code violations and fraudulent reporting. How comprehensive are we talking? Marcus asked, though I could hear the excitement in his voice. Marcus lived for this kind of systematic enforcement. Every property within a 2-block radius. Full structural, electrical, plumbing, and zoning compliance review. While Marcus organized the inspection team, I made another call to Janet Torres, the officer who'd responded to Victoria's complaint. Officer Torres, this is Ryan Mitchell. I have some additional information about that property dispute case you handled yesterday. Information that suggests the complainant may have filed false police reports. The conversation that followed was career-defining for both of us. Torres had been investigating property fraud cases for 3 years and immediately recognized the sophisticated nature of Victoria's operation. Mr. Mitchell, what you're describing sounds like organized real estate fraud. We're going to need everything you have. Within hours, I had a war room set up in my kitchen. city inspection schedules, property records, complaint histories, and most importantly, 3 years' worth of security camera footage that Victoria didn't know existed. My security system had been recording her nocturnal fence adjustments, her property line measurements, and most damning of all, her late-night meetings with the unlicensed contractor who'd helped move my survey markers. At exactly 8 a.m. Thursday morning, the city inspection convoy arrived on our street. 3 vehicles, 5 inspectors, and enough official authority to make every homeowner nervous, except me. I watched from my kitchen window as Victoria's confident morning routine was shattered by the sight of Marcus Rodriguez walking up her driveway with a clipboard and a very serious expression. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm Chief Inspector Rodriguez. We're conducting a routine neighborhood safety assessment. I'll need access to your property for structural and compliance verification." Victoria's face went through a fascinating series of expressions: confusion, concern, and then that calculated look I'd come to recognize. "I wasn't notified about any inspection. Ma'am, when we have reason to believe there may be safety violations, we don't require advance notice. May I see your permits for this garage conversion?" That's when Victoria's composure cracked for the first time. "Garage conversion? I don't know what you mean." Marcus consulted his tablet. "The commercial office space with separate electrical service and modified septic connection. These permits should be on file with the city." I stepped outside to water my plants, definitely not trying to eavesdrop on the conversation happening 20 feet away. "This is harassment," Victoria said, her voice climbing in pitch. "This is retaliation because I filed a legitimate complaint about my neighbor. Ma'am, these inspections are based on anonymous reports filed over the past year. Are you suggesting those reports were false?" The irony was beautiful. Victoria was being investigated because of her own complaint system. Over the next 4 hours, Marcus and his team systematically documented every violation on Victoria's property: the illegal office conversion, the unpermitted electrical work, the modified septic system, and something even I hadn't expected: a basement apartment she'd been renting out through Airbnb without any of the required permits or safety inspections. But Marcus discovered something that made my blood run cold. Hidden behind a false wall in Victoria's garage office was a second computer system, one that wasn't connected to her main network. This system contained detailed surveillance files on every family in a 4-block radius, photos taken through windows, financial records obtained through questionable means, and personal information that could only have been gathered through systematic stalking. "Ryan," Marcus said quietly, pulling me aside as his team photographed the evidence, "this isn't just fraud. This woman's been running a sophisticated operation. Look at this." He showed me a color-coded map of our neighborhood. Green dots marked completed acquisitions. Yellow dots showed targets in progress, and red dots indicated obstacles to remove. My house had a red dot with a thick black circle around it. "She marked you for elimination." Marcus continued, "Not just harassment, complete destruction. There are detailed plans here for destroying your professional reputation, your custody arrangement, even your credit rating." The realization hit me like ice water. Victoria hadn't just called the police about my pool demolition on impulse. She'd been planning my professional and personal destruction for months, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. But the real bombshell came when Officer Torres arrived with a search warrant. "Mrs. Bennett, we have a warrant to search your property and seize computer equipment related to an ongoing investigation into fraudulent municipal complaints." I had given Torres everything: the IP address records, the pattern of targeting vulnerable neighbors, and most importantly, the security footage of Victoria moving property markers in the middle of the night. As police officers carried computers and filing cabinets out of Victoria's house, neighbors started gathering. Word travels fast on a street where everyone knows everyone else's business. "Mrs. Patterson shuffled over in her bathrobe, her eyes wide behind thick glasses. "Ryan, what's happening to Victoria? Looks like someone's been filing false complaints with the city," I said carefully, targeting neighbors who couldn't afford to fight back. The crowd grew larger as more details emerged. The Johnsons arrived with their medical bills and the citation Victoria had cost them. 3 other families brought their own stories of harassment disguised as code enforcement. That's when Derek Chen arrived with news that would seal Victoria's fate. "Ryan," he called out, holding up a thick folder. You need to see this. Victoria's been running a property acquisition scheme. She targets struggling homeowners, harasses them with code violations until they can't afford to maintain their properties, then swoops in with below-market purchase offers. How many properties, I asked, though I dreaded the answer. 12. Across 3 different neighborhoods. She's made almost $2 million in the past 5 years. The crowd around us fell silent. Victoria Bennett wasn't just a difficult neighbor. She was a predator who'd been systematically destroying families for profit. Mrs. Patterson spoke up from the crowd, her voice shaking with emotion. Victoria offered to buy my house last month. Said she was helping me because I couldn't afford the citations. I almost said yes. She came to us too, said Tom Johnson, his wife clutching their young son's hand. Right after we got that violation notice about our fence. Offered cash. No inspection. Quick closing. Said we needed to take it because we'd never pass a proper home sale with all our code violations. Other neighbors began sharing similar stories. Victoria had approached 6 different families with below-market offers, always timing them perfectly after her harassment campaigns had created financial desperation. The pattern was so consistent it could have been a business textbook case study in predatory real estate practices. Derek Chen took notes as each family spoke, building what would become a class-action lawsuit that would eventually recover nearly $3 million in damages and fraudulent profits. That's when Victoria made her final desperate play. She marched out of her house, past the police officers still loading evidence into their van, and confronted me directly in front of the entire neighborhood. You think you're so smart, Ryan Mitchell, she said, her voice shaking with rage. You have no idea what you've started. I have connections in this city. I have dirt on half the planning commission. This won't end well for you. I looked at her calmly. Surrounded by neighbors, she'd tormented and evidence of crimes that would put her away for years. Actually, Victoria, I think it's ending exactly how it should. But you're right about one thing. I do know what I started. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. See, when you called the police on me for destroying my own pool, you triggered something called a reciprocal investigation. That's when code enforcement looks at the complainant's property to verify they're not filing frivolous reports. Her face went pale as understanding dawned. And Victoria? Remember when you said you'd been documenting everything? Well, so had your own security cameras. Turns out, when the police sees evidence, they get access to everything on your system. Officer Torres approached with handcuffs. Victoria Bennett, you're under arrest for filing false police reports, municipal fraud, and operating an unlicensed business. As they read her rights, Victoria looked back at me with pure hatred. This isn't over. Actually, I said quietly, it really is. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Within hours, local news stations picked up the story. OA president arrested in multi-million-dollar property fraud scheme dominated the evening news cycle. Victoria's mugshot appeared next to graphics showing her victims' homes and the financial damage she'd caused. But the media attention brought unexpected allies. 3 families from neighboring subdivisions contacted police with similar stories about Victoria's previous addresses. Her pattern was always the same: move into an upscale neighborhood, gain HOA leadership, then systematically harass vulnerable homeowners until they sold below market value to her shell companies. Detective Sarah Mills, who'd taken over the expanded investigation, called me with an update that showcased the true scope of Victoria's operations. Ryan, we've traced property purchases across 5 counties. She's been running this scheme for 8 years, targeting over 40 families. You stopping her probably saved dozens of future victims. The legal proceedings moved remarkably fast. Victoria's attorney attempted to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence was overwhelming. Security footage, financial records, victim testimonials, and most damaging of all, her own meticulously kept files documenting her targeting strategies. During the sentencing hearing, I watched from the gallery as family after family testified about Victoria's impact on their lives. Mrs. Patterson, now steady on her feet and clear-eyed, described how Victoria's harassment had nearly forced her to abandon the home she'd shared with her husband for 37 years. She preyed on grief. Mrs. Patterson said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. But thanks to Mr. Mitchell's courage to fight back. She couldn't finish what she started. The judge, Honorable Margaret Chen, had seen property fraud cases before, but nothing quite like Victoria's systematic operation. "Mrs. Bennett," she said during sentencing, "you didn't just steal money. You stole peace of mind, security, and in some cases, people's homes. You weaponized the very systems designed to protect communities." Victoria's final statement to the court was telling. No remorse. No acknowledgement of harm caused. Instead, she blamed her victims for being financially irresponsible and claimed she was providing a valuable service by helping them avoid foreclosure. 6 weeks later, Emma was helping me design our new backyard space where the pool used to be. The concrete was gone, replaced by a garden bed where we'd plant vegetables together every other weekend. Sarah had called me the night Victoria's story hit the local news. Seeing my competence and protective instincts highlighted in media coverage had shifted her perspective about my ability to keep Emma safe. "I misjudged you, Ryan," Sarah had said during that late-night phone call. "I thought your job made you rigid and controlling. I didn't realize it made you someone who protects people. Emma needs that kind of father." The custody modification hearing was scheduled for next month, but Sarah had already agreed to expand my time with Emma to alternating weeks. For the first time since the divorce, I felt like a real father again instead of a weekend visitor in my daughter's life. "Dad," Emma said, carefully arranging stepping stones in patterns only a 7-year-old could envision. "Why did the mean lady try to steal our yard?" "Sometimes, sweetheart, people think rules don't apply to them, but rules exist to protect everyone. And when someone breaks them, there are consequences." Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Like when I don't clean my room and lose tablet time?" "Exactly like that. But bigger consequences for bigger rule breaking." She seemed satisfied with this explanation and went back to her garden planning. Watching her work, I realized that Victoria's scheme had accidentally given me something precious. Fighting for our home had shown Emma that her dad would always protect what mattered most. Victoria received 3 years in prison for fraud and harassment. The HOA dissolved her illegal contracts and returned stolen fees to residents. Property values in our neighborhood actually increased once her schemes were exposed and remedied. Mrs. Patterson got her citations reversed and never had to pay the fines that would have forced her to sell her home. The Johnsons received a settlement that covered their son's medical bills and then some. But the real victory was simpler than all that. Emma and I had our weekends back. Our backyard was becoming something beautiful again, and our neighborhood felt safe. Sometimes the person trying to enforce the rules is the biggest rule breaker of all. And sometimes, all it takes is one dad with a sledgehammer to bring down an entire house of cards. The security cameras are still recording. By the way, because you never know when someone might think they can outsmart a municipal code enforcement officer who's learned to always be prepared for the next Victoria Bennett. And trust me, there's always a next one. But here's what I learned from this whole experience. Knowledge is power, but knowing when and how to use that knowledge responsibly is wisdom. Victoria had legal expertise, but she used it to harm people. I had regulatory knowledge, and I used it to protect my community. The difference between justice and revenge isn't always clear in the moment, but time has a way of revealing which path you actually chose. 3 months later, watching Emma plant sunflowers where the pool used to be, I knew we'd chosen correctly. Because sometimes the most important code you can enforce is the one that protects the people you care about. The security footage that brought Victoria down now serves training purposes. I've shared copies with City Department, where officers learn predatory patterns. Victoria's case became a textbook example. 3 months later, I received a letter from a Phoenix officer. She'd used our methods to expose another fraud ring. "Your story saved 8 families," she wrote. The real victory wasn't stopping Victoria. It was proving that standing up protects countless future victims.